Hey SAT students, this is Guy from PengPrep.com. If you watched video 1 of non-essential clauses, you should now be able to spot where a non-essential clause is and the punctuation that fits right next to it. In this video, we'll learn about more tricky cases like sequential or nested non-essential clauses. Let's begin. The company which moved the world suddenly collapsed. This is pretty normal. The non-essential clause is which moved the world. But we can place another non-essential clause within the existing one. For example, the company which despite its poor performance moved the world suddenly collapsed. Here, the non-essential clause despite its poor performance is nested within the outer non-essential clause, the company moved the world. Cases like this, where a non-essential clause is inside another non-essential clause, is called a nested non-essential clause. One more example. My college roommate, who because she practiced 6 hours a day won the international piano competition, now plays for the symphony. The outer non-essential clause here is who won the international piano competition, and the inner non-essential clause is because she practiced 6 hours a day. Since one is inside the other, this is also a nested non-essential clause. Now, pause the video and try it yourself. Identify the outer and inner non-essential clause. Now, how do we punctuate nested non-essential clauses? It's simple. Find the outer non-essential clause and place 2 commas, 2 dashes, or 2 parentheses around it. Find the inner one and do the same. Let's apply this to our previous example. The company which despite its poor performance moved the world suddenly collapsed. Which moved the world is the outer non-essential clause, so we place 2 commas around it. Then, despite its poor performance is the inner non-essential clause, so we place another 2 commas around it. There! We have a correctly punctuated nested non-essential clause. We can use different punctuations to set off the outer and inner non-essential clauses. Here's an example where the outer non-essential clause is surrounded by a dash, but the inner one is surrounded by a comma. The reverse also works. Both are grammatically correct. Although this is possible, the punctuation used within each outer and inner non-essential clauses should be the same. For example, this sentence is okay, but if we replace the dash with a comma, it's no longer okay. That's because the outer non-essential clause is now surrounded by a mix of punctuations, a dash and a comma. And if you remember video 1, this is not okay. Now, let's try a problem together. Pause the video, read the problem, then listen to my explanation. Finished? Then let's begin. First, we need to spot where the outer and inner non-essential clauses are. The outer non-essential clauses, which was completed with a golden spike at Promontory Summit. The inner non-essential clauses, joining the Central Pacific and Union Pacific lines. With a bit of close reading, we see that the punctuation for the outer non-essential clause is already completed. Now, the punctuation in the blank will then be used to close the inner non-essential clause. Now, since the inner non-essential clause begins with a comma, it must also end with a comma so that we don't mix up different punctuations for the same inner non-essential clause. So the correct answer has to be B. Now, try these problems yourself. The outer non-essential clause is which was patented in 1942. The inner non-essential clause is though the US Navy declined to adopt it during the war. The outer non-essential clause's punctuations are already complete. We just need to determine the correct punctuation to close the inner non-essential clause. Since the inner non-essential clause currently begins with a comma, we must also end it with a comma. This makes the correct answer A. For the second problem, the outer non-essential clause is from whose 1925 doctoral thesis to hydrogen and helium. The second non-essential clause is from drawing on to physicist Meghnad Saha. Now, the outer non-essential clauses punctuations are already complete, and we only need to determine the closing punctuation for the inner non-essential clause. Now, the starting punctuation for the inner non-essential clause is a dash, so we must also end it with a dash. This makes D the correct option. Now, let's look at sequential non-essential clauses. Here's an example. The novelist Toni Morrison drafted her most famous book, Beloved, a searing account of a formerly enslaved mother haunted by her past over a span of years. Here we see that the first non-essential clause is beloved, and the second non-essential clause is from a searing account to haunted by her past. So there are 2 non-essential clauses here, and they're right next to each other in sequence. We call these sequential non-essential clauses. There's 2 terms you need to know regarding sequential non-essential clauses. First, the whole sequence of non-essential clauses is called a large non-essential clause. Second, each non-essential clause inside the sequence is called a small non-essential clause. As for the punctuation rules, there are 2. First, the large non-essential clause needs to have the same starting and ending punctuation. Second, the small non-essential clauses inside the sequence need to be separated by commas. Let's see if the example provided is grammatically correct according to the rules. The large non-essential clause from beloved to past is surrounded by the same punctuation, in this case a dash. And the small non-essential clauses need to be separated by commas, which they already are. So this case is a correctly punctuated sequential non-essential clause. Let's look at one more example. If you feel confident, try and answer the questions as well. Now let's analyze. The large non-essential clause is from the F308 to his own invention. This first small non-essential clause is the F308, and the second is from at the time to own invention. Again, let's check if they're correctly punctuated. First, are the small non-essential clauses separated by a comma? Yes. Second, are the large non-essential clauses surrounded by the same punctuation? Yes, by 2 dashes. So this example is correctly punctuated. Now some keen students may have smelled something weird. F308 is a non-essential clause, but it's surrounded by 2 different punctuations, a comma and a dash. So haven't we violated the rule from video 1 that a non-essential clause needs to be surrounded by the same punctuation? Yes, we did, but it's okay to do so only for small non-essential clauses that are part of a sequential non-essential clause. So it's an exception like the word that in video 1. Even in the first example, we actually broke the rule by surrounding the clause from a searing account to buy or past with a comma and a dash. But again, it's a small non-essential clause that's part of a sequential non-essential clause, so it's okay to do that as long as you abide by these 2 rules. Now let's try this problem together. Please pause the video, read it first, then listen to my explanation. The first small non-essential clause is from the album to Manhattan apartment. The second small non-essential clause is from realize to synthesizer. The large non-essential clause is then going to be the combination of these 2. Now, we need to solve this problem using the 2 punctuation rules I told you before. First, is the large non-essential clause punctuated correctly? Yes, there's a comma in the beginning and a comma at the end, the same punctuation, so it meets rule number 1. Now, rule number 2 is what this problem is testing. The blank is going to contain the punctuation that links the 2 small non-essential clauses, and according to our rule, that punctuation needs to be a comma, so the correct answer has to be A. Now pause the video and try these problems yourself. The first small non-essential clause is Catherine Dunham. The second small non-essential clause is from after to reshaped her vocabulary. This large non-essential clause is the combination of the 2. We see that the punctuation linking the 2 small non-essential clauses is already provided, so the problem is testing you on whether you know how to punctuate the large non-essential clause. Now the large non-essential clause begins with a comma, so it must also end with a comma according to rule 1 for sequential non-essential clauses. So the correct answer has to be A. For the second problem, I'll keep the explanation short. The large non-essential clause is from and nearly to kill most mammals. The problem is testing you on whether you know how to punctuate this large non-essential clause. Since it begins with a dash, you need to end it with a dash. So the correct answer is C. A lot of you ask whether you need to memorize all these cases. For fundamentals like video 1, yes, you need to. But for variations like nested or sequential non-essential clauses, they are not meant for you to memorize. There are countless variations for each skill area, and we can't feasibly cover all of them. So the point of working through these variations is not to store them in your head. It's so that you can see the fundamentals in action so that you can apply them to problems you've never seen before. So don't try to memorize, try and understand. Let's move on to the hardest problem now. This problem is insanely difficult because it involves both a nested and sequential non-essential clause. The nested non-essential clause is composed of an outer non-essential clause, which is from Whose Canvas Resurrection to White House Collection, and the inner non-essential clause, which is from A Joyous Composition to Year of Her Retirement. Now, few keen students will recognize that this inner non-essential clause is actually a sequential non-essential clause. That is, the inner non-essential clause is composed of 2 small non-essential clauses that are in sequence. The first small non-essential clause is from A Joyous to completed in 1966. The second small non-essential clause is from the year to retirement. If you were able to analyze all of this alone, then yes, you're ready to move on to the practice problems. Now, continuing on with the explanation, there are 2 ways to solve this problem. If you use the nested non-essential clause strategy, you'll notice that this blank is used to fill in the punctuation that closes the inner non-essential clause. Since the inner non-essential clause begins with a dash, it must also end with a dash, so the correct answer is A. The second way to solve this problem is using sequential non-essential clauses. You'll notice that this blank is used to close the large non-essential clause. Since the large non-essential clause is from Joyous all the way to of her retirement, and since it begins with a dash, you must also end it with a dash. So again, the correct answer is A. Wow, that was a lot. Now here's a full summary on non-essential clauses. First, a non-essential clause is a group of words that you can remove from a sentence while keeping the sentence grammatically correct. Second, when a non-essential clause is placed in the beginning, follow it after with a comma or a dash. When it's in the middle, surround it with a comma, dash, or two parentheses. When it's at the end, you precede it with a comma, dash, or surround it with parentheses. If the group of words begins with the word that, even if you can remove it while keeping the sentence grammatically correct, you cannot consider it a non-essential clause. And because you can't consider it a non-essential clause, you can't apply the punctuation rules for it. This means that there will generally be no punctuation next to the word that. Number 4, although there normally won't be a punctuation next to the word that, when a non-essential clause is placed directly next to it, you can allow a punctuation to be placed. Number 6, when you see a sequential non-essential clause, make sure that the large non-essential clause is separated by the same punctuation and that the small non-essential clauses are separated by commas. Alright, you made it. As always, practice problems are on pengprep.com with the link in the description below, and in the next video, I'll teach you how to distinguish between problems that require leveling strategies and non-essential clauses. I'll see you then.